reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
A long time ago now, there was a television show called Dallas. Big hit. But you know how it is with long-running shows? You start running out of plot twists. So at the end of season 8, they killed off the second male lead, Bobby Ewing, and season 9 proceeded without him. And it was a ratings disaster. So after a year, they brought Bobby Ewing back from the dead and wrote off the entirety of season 9 as a bad dream. Here is lovely Victoria Principal awaking drowsily from her year-long slumbers and rising from her bed. She does that very well. As I think she told Terry Wogan, some of her acting is almost credible in this scene. And she got a hell of a shock when she opened the shower door. Oh my. Well, for the purposes of argument, Victoria Principal is you, and Bobby Ewing in the shower is all our most fundamental liberties. We killed them off in early 2020. And it was quite an interesting plot twist for 2 weeks to flatten the curve, but it's been 2 years and it's flattened everything, not least the economy. As I've said before, the cost of living is the cost of lockdown. So I'm minded to propose a Dallas-type solution, that we write off the last 2 years as a bad dream. You remember when Nigel formed the Brexit Party, single issue? I'm thinking of starting the 2019 party, likewise single issue, to restore the world as was before the quote-unquote experts wrecked everything. All statutes and regulations introduced since the beginning of 2020 would be repealed, and anybody who'd supported them would be expelled from public life. Instead, of course, the same quote-unquote experts are determined to wreck even more. We'll explore various aspects of that on tonight's show. The Western world is Dallas, your Victoria Principal. It's time to open the shower door and write off the bad dream of the last 2 years. Email me via gbviews@gbnews.uk, Twitter me at gbnews, all that after the news with Miranda Shunker.
Thanks, Mark. Good evening. The top stories from the GB newsroom. A Conservative MP has been arrested on suspicion of rape and sexual assault offences. The unnamed man, aged in his 50s, is also accused of abusing a position of trust and misconduct in public office. Scotland Yard says the offences are alleged to have taken place in London between 2002 and 2009. The Tory Chief Whip has asked him to stay away from Parliament during the investigation. A serial rapist who attacked women over nearly 3 decades has been found guilty of murder at Reading Crown Court. 66-year-old Donald Robertson was convicted of killing Shani Warren. Her body was found bound and gagged in Taplow Lake in Buckinghamshire in 1987. He was charged after a police cold case team discovered new DNA evidence linking him to her death. He was also found guilty of kidnapping and raping a teenager in 1981. The European Union has warned it will respond with all measures at its disposal if the UK breaks the Northern Ireland Protocol. European Commission Vice President Maros Sefcovic says practical solutions to problems have been offered, but the UK has failed to meet them halfway. The Foreign Secretary has set out plans to rewrite Britain's post-Brexit trading agreement, changing the rules on how goods enter Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK. Liz Truss says the government is still open to negotiations and the new measures don't break international law.
This is not about scrapping the protocol. Our aim is to deliver on the protocol's objectives. We will cement those provisions which are working in the protocol, including the common travel area, the single electricity market and North-South cooperation, whilst fixing those elements that aren't, on the movement of goods, goods regulation, VAT, subsidy control and governance.
Boris Johnson has defended plans to give volunteer police officers powers to use tasers, saying it's the government's crucial duty to make communities safer. Under new Home Office plans, special constables will be allowed to carry tasers if authorised by their chief officers. Amnesty International is calling the move dangerous, saying misuse can lead to harm and even death. But the Home Secretary says the measures will ensure volunteers are not at a disadvantage when facing knife attackers or terror threats. And the Queen has made a special appearance at London's Paddington Station today, officially opening the completed Elizabeth line named in her honour. The 96-year-old monarch was joined by her youngest son, Prince Edward, who became the first passenger travelling to Tottenham Court Road. The line opens to the public next week. Well, on TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Mark.
Thank you, Miranda. How lovely to see Her Majesty at Paddington opening the Elizabeth line. Wonderful stuff. Not sure about Liz Truss. I don't quite understand why the common travel area, which has existed between the UK and the Irish Free State since its creation in 1922. I don't quite understand what that's got to do with Brussels, but that's just me. I can't sit here just doing commentary on the news bulletin for the rest of the hour. So, on yesterday's show, I began by saying that thanks to 2 years of insane policies by almost all Western governments, you're poorer, you're sicker, your children are damaged. But what do I know? I'm just some bloke on the telly. So here's the Governor of the Bank of England. Quote, "Apocalyptic food prices will be disastrous for world's poor." Apocalyptic. That's his word. You may remember that Nigel on his show, his audience question was, is the apocalypse upon us? That's always a good sign when that's the audience question. Normally the way it works is that it's the bloke on the telly who's the big, hysterical, shrieking old queen. And I'm usually quite happy to play that role, while the central banker chappies are calm, prudent, measured, understated. So when the Governor of the Bank of England starts bandying words like apocalyptic, it may be time to head for the hills. A lot of the stuff we obsess about, net zero, statue toppling, which is an Olympic sport now, I believe. Statue toppling, the appalling transphobia of suggesting that only women can get pregnant. All these are indulgences. They're things you have to be able to afford to obsess about. They presume a wealthy society, wealthy enough to be totally stupid, as we put it last week. We're no longer wealthy enough. According to Her Majesty's government, quote, people face biggest drop in living standards since 1956. Do you remember 1956? It was a long time ago. The Dreamweavers were #1 in the charts.
Sadness, I fear your lips won't be smiling, your eyes will not shine, for I know tomorrow's
Wait, enough of that. Enough of that. Take it off. That's too old even for the oldie stations. We still had farthings and florins. We were governed by a cabinet of white men born in the 19th century. Nothing survives of that Britain except, thank heavens, the Queen. And now, very retro, very nostalgic, a 1956-style collapse in living standards. Governments have spent 2 years blowing through so much money, our great-grandchildren will still be paying it off a century hence in order to pay us to sit in our flats eating cheesy Wotsits and watching idiotic superhero movies on Netflix in which Cardboard Man and Franchise Girl are locked in combat with Dr. Sequel to prevent him unleashing a killer virus on the world until they discover, warning, plot spoiler, that in fact it's wearing stupid masks all day that's really dangerous. So all the superheroes drop dead. 80% of all the US dollars in circulation have been printed in the last 2 years. In the first year of the new normal, the government of the United Kingdom borrowed £300 billion, the highest figure since records began in 1946. As is traditional, bazillions of quid were filched by fraudsters, equivalent to a third of the total budget of the NHS. Remember the NHS, those guys you banged the saucepans for and whom you haven't seen in years? 1 in 9 citizens of the United Kingdom is now on the NHS waiting list. That's an all-time record since records began in the early Middle Ages when there was a 3-month waiting list to get a leech. They want you to keep talking about ginger growlers and the absolute banal reductio of party politics. Ooh, your leader's illegal party was way bigger than my leader's illegal party. Because otherwise you might conclude that our political class is either stupid or evil and demand that they push off and form Blair-like and Clinton-esque charities, quote unquote, where they can give $2 million speeches about rising sea levels for the rest of their lives. Let me know your take. GBviews at gbnews.uk. You can tweet me at GBnews. Laura Perrins is one of the sharpest commentators out there. You know she's good because the group think, oh, Laura is not there. Is Laura? Natalie Winters is happily with us, and we asked Natalie to come on because I mentioned masks there, and we talked about masks a little bit, I think it was last week or the week before, and reported on how microplastics are now being found deeper in the human lungs than anywhere else. Well, we now have a paper on that about the correlation between face masks and COVID-19 outcomes, examining data from 35 different countries and finding as follows, quote, this is the conclusion of this, and it's peer-reviewed for all you follow the science on, must follow the science, must follow the science. This is peer-reviewed up the wazoo, so you can take it to the bank. Quote, the moderate positive correlation between mask usage and deaths in Western Europe suggests that the universal use of masks may have had harmful unintended consequences. Oh my. Natalie has been writing about this over at the National Pulse. Natalie, it's great to see you. The striking thing is not just that it turns out masks don't do anything, but in fact that there is a correlation between masks and COVID fatalities. 35 European countries, as big a study as you can get.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This study was fairly comprehensive. It encompassed over 600 million people, 35 countries. As you mentioned, they accounted for a lot of different variables, whether that be vaccination, age, comorbidities. But what was so interesting about this study, again, a study that's not funded by any pharmaceutical giant, no conflicts of interest there. So it's interesting the kind of science that you get from studies that don't have this sort of murky financing behind them. But the study didn't just find that masks didn't do anything to prevent the spread of COVID-19, which is an interesting finding in and of itself, but it actually took it a step further and actually found that countries that implemented very rigid, very strict mask mandates actually had increased fatality rates from COVID-19. And this actually dovetails with another recent study that came out from a German scientist analyzing case studies across the state of Kansas in the United States. And they actually found that the stricter the mask mandate in a given county, the higher the case fatality rate was for individuals with COVID-19. And they get into the science and really just the application of masks in terms of how this impacts fatality rates. And there's some science that's starting to show, whether it be microplastics, like we had talked about, I think it was 2 weeks ago, but how it actually helps to really push air droplets and even some respiratory diseases, specifically COVID-19, potentially deeper into the lungs. So it seems like we may have been trusting the experts not on how to cure COVID-19, but actually on how to spread it best.
Yes, that's what's really shocking. What's fascinating to me about this, Natalie, is that it wasn't so long ago that the people who went around wearing masks all day long in advanced Western societies were considered to be weird. Michael Jackson, the late pop star, was the most famous person of it. He went around wearing a surgical mask and he died at 50, so it didn't actually work out for him. I'm not saying correlation is causation. But what I find interesting is that within a very short space of time, we were somehow able to persuade all the nice people, all the people who listen to the BBC, all the respectable people, that somehow, without any evidence whatsoever, masks were a prudent, responsible response to COVID. And it turns out there's no evidence for that.
Well, that's what's so ridiculous about the mask mandates, because they enforced them so intensely, so stringently. You know, at first it was only supposed to be 15 days to slow the spread in the United States. It turned into what seems to be now probably like 15 years. But the science hasn't been there from the beginning. And the scientific process, right, is about questioning and being able to actually get to the bottom of data and evidence and analysis. But it really seems that these so-called public health experts, really in lockstep from country to country, just adopted these mask mandates not based on science, but really based on power. And I think that that gets to something that I know I've been talking a lot about with you, but just more broadly in general, which is that it doesn't seem that these public safety measures have been created to actually help or defend public safety. It's really been about just, I think, expanding the power of these public safety, public health bureaucrats. And in reality, there's no accountability for them because the methods that they've been pushing, study after study, again, those that don't have conflicts of interest, those that aren't funded by Anthony Fauci or the British government, seem to be showing a very, very different line than what we're hearing from the so-called authoritative voices up at the podium.
Yes, it's interesting. We just saw a sign saying wash your hands, and washing your hands every so often is certainly good advice, and hygiene is actually the biggest, basic hygiene is the biggest part of public health. But for example, encouraging children to use that gooey, sticky disinfectant 15 times a day actually weakens the building of your immune system. But there's no accountability for these public health bureaucrats. They cruise on regardless, like Dr. Fauci in your own country, or these various nitwits with knighthoods that infest Her Majesty's dominions. But either way, there's no accountability for this rubbish.
No, you're totally correct. And I used to think that it was just these people didn't care about what they were doing to children in terms of forcing them to wear masks even when it's sunny outside and there's no chance the virus could spread. But I think there's something darker going on there. And I think it really circles around a power dynamic. and that these public health bureaucrats, they've really used COVID-19 as a pretext to kind of implement, I think, some of their worst, they would say fantasies, I would call it a nightmare, but just unchecked power. They've never let a crisis, or really a variant, go to waste to roll out new measures. And there really hasn't been any accountability. And I think the icing on the cake, the most absurd part about all this, is that the World Health Organization, which really pushed for mask mandates at the beginning of all this, is likely to come out of COVID-19 with more power than it began with in 2019. So that just shows you how rigged it is, and how public health is not about public health. It's about appeasing whether the industry's big pharma, frankly, even some of the mask companies. But there's always conflicts of interest behind this, and it's really sad to see.
Thank you very much, Natalie. You heard what Natalie just said there. Public health is not about public health, and that is, the public seems to be an all but irrelevant component about public health as it's practiced by the WHO and these powerful public health bureaucracies across the planet. Thank you very much, Natalie. We're going to be coming right back with lots more on this and the cost of living. We're going to, not sure what's happened to Laura Perrins, but we're going to send the crack team out to find her, and we'll get her on the air for you. Coming straight back. Don't go anywhere.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Let's get to your comments. Ricky says politicians earn $100,000 a year, have subsidised mortgages, food, beer, parking. Yeah, actually, you know, Beergate. Does Keir Starmer ever pay for his own beer? They live in a bubble, says Ricky. That's all needs to be said in answer to that question. It is very true that at a certain level of politician or public figure, public service as we say, at a certain level you're very rarely called upon to write a personal check, are you? Question everything says maybe they're just trying to solve the obesity crisis. Yeah, well, like most solutions they come up with, it's just going to make everything worse, because oddly enough, commanding people to stay in their flats except for designated government-approved perambulation for short periods a day, and you just sit there on the sofa and watch Philip Schofield all day long, that isn't actually going to do anything for the obesity crisis. Philip looks fabulous, but you won't. John says the Dallas episode is far more believable than the 2 years we've spent in the shower. It is actually. The plot twist in Dallas is actually less ridiculous than if you say, well, do you realise, if you'd said to somebody in 2019, do you realise you're going to be living inside by government order for months on end because American taxpayers were subsidising gain-of-function research at a laboratory controlled by the Chinese Communist Party? People would say, that's absurd, that's absurd. Give me Victoria Principal in the shower in Dallas any day. That's far more believable. Mary says there's a petition against the WHO, World Health Organization, that has over 112,000 signatures. We're going to be talking about that with Michelle Bachmann in a little bit. Laura Perrins, as I said earlier, is one of the sharpest commentators out there. You know she's good because the groupthink enforcers at Twitter shut her down just today for the crime of linking to Vicky and Charlotte, the two vaccine widows who were on our show last night. Laura has an excellent column on the so-called cost of living over at The Conservative Woman. And Laura, you have a line in there that is true. This is in reference to Tory MPs now giving advice on how to cook a 7-course meal for 3 shillings and 4pence or whatever it is. You say these these politicians are literally telling you that the time of easy living has passed.
Yes, yeah. I mean, again, I was on last week talking about the war on tumble dryers, and we had more of that over the weekend. I couldn't believe that the papers were running this line again. And then, of course, we had the Tory MP last week giving us out great budgetary tips on how to cook a meal from 30p. And again, you know, look. Everybody likes to save a buck or two, don't get me wrong, and I know I like to think I'm not a spendthrift myself, but this is going to knock, you know, £1 or £2 off your weekly budget. When I use the phrase in my piece today, you are going to be hit by economic Armageddon. And as you say, I mean, often myself and, you know, commentators such as you and I, we may be given to a little bit of exaggeration in the rhetoric stakes. But then when I opened my Times today and I saw the Bank of England using the governor using a very similar word, namely, you're going to have an apocalypse, a food price apocalypse, then things are really worrying. And you know, what the Tories are doing at the moment is blaming everybody else, right? It's the Russians, and it was the COVID, and others will say it was the Brexit. And I was thinking to myself last night, we have had Tory-led rule, and this is a Conservative speaking, for 12 years. And, you know, what have we to show for it? As you say, the biggest drop in living standards since 1956, the highest tax burden in 70 years. And it certainly isn't just black swan events, which they should anticipate. They mightn't be able to anticipate the exact event, but they should know that, you know, you are going to get a black swan event. But I mean, it is certainly the cost of lockdown crisis. I mean, if you look at test and trace, which I've discussed in the piece, that cost £37 billion, Mark. Just think about how can you actually spend that amount of money? You can't spend 37 billion. Think how hard it is to spend 1 billion. And they got through £37 billion. What could you do with that now in this cost of lockdown crisis? Quite a bit, I would have thought.
Yeah, absolutely stupid and an irrelevant metric that just distracts everybody. You're quite right. I'm as right-wing. I'm far right. I'm extreme right, according whenever anybody mentions me in the papers. I'm as right-wing as you can get. And I've sat here and watched Conservative-led government, because there are cycles. You have, Labour gets in, Tories get in. The pendulum swings, Labour, Tory, Labour, Tory. I can't. We've had from the equivalent of from 1979 to 1991. So we've had the equivalent of the entire Thatcher era and Conservative-led government hasn't actually done anything Conservative.
Yeah, no, they did do the gay marriage thing though, Mark, so it was totally worth it. You know, totally worth it. You know, don't we got that in. I mean, I know, it's basically you and I. We are the abused spouses, and I get this a lot, right? Some idiotic Tory MP says something stupid on the radio, and then I will get loads of calls saying, you know, oh, will you come on and defend this person? And I'm like, no, I'm not doing anymore. I'm not defending you anymore. What you have done is indefensible. They are a bunch of economic terrorists who spent, again, billions on the furlough, for instance, which, let us remember, was to pay perfectly healthy people to stay at home for months on end and watch Netflix. And as you say, it isn't just our kids that are going to be paying for that. It'll be our kids that are paying for that. And I use the word criminal. It really is. And I think, you know, economic Armageddon is going to hit Middle England quite badly. I mean, people on much lower incomes, goodness knows what they are going to do. Things are going to get very, very serious. And I know the left have been highlighting it. And now, you know, over the years, I think they are given to exaggeration. But now it's time to listen. It is time to listen to people who are not on our side, because things are going to get very, very serious for people on much lower incomes. And the Tories, what they have done, it's completely indefensible. I am not, they take the voting public for granted. Enough. You do not get to take our vote for granted. You had one job when they got in, Mark, and that was to put the financial house in order after 2008. That was the one thing they had to do. They weren't voted in because, you know, people think they're really nice and fuzzy. No, people view the Conservatives as necessary evil. Get them in, clean up the mess that Labour made. Well, I don't think Labour could have made a bigger mess than what the Conservatives have done so far. I just don't.
Well, you know, the Tories, Boris Johnson certainly, is still talking about all this rubbish like net zero. A lot of the stuff we talk about they're what they call first world problems. They're problems of prosperity. You know, so nothing bad. I'm 27 years old. I have no memory of anything bad happening. So for me, the biggest issue is transgender bathrooms. When you actually can't afford, you have to choose between eating food or heating your own home. These self-indulgent topics like toppling the statue of some bloke who died in 1783, we waste all our time. We're coming back to a period when reality, hard, cruel reality, is asserting itself.
No, absolutely. But also, Mark, I wonder if you know, I think one of the reasons why the millennial Generation Z get fixated on these issues that people before would never get fixated on is because, again, they have no capital, right? They can't afford to own their own home, again, thanks to the genius Tory government. So what is there left to do? There was actually a great article in City Journal, I don't mind citing, that said, because we've got so many graduates now, all these people need jobs, but there aren't actually enough real jobs out there. So they just fill all the equality and diversity positions. Because if you don't give these people something to argue about, like the transgender bathrooms, well, I mean, then they might realise that actually they have no chance of owning a home, and they might get properly angry about something and hold, again, the Conservative government to account. So you're better off just let them have their argument over their transgender bathrooms. They can't do any real damage there, arguably, because, you know, that's all they have time for, and they certainly, it's not like they've got a house to buy, right, or a family to raise, or a wife to argue with, because they can't afford to do any of those things.
No, that's very true. Let's assume, though, for the moment, see if you can do this with a straight face, Laura. Let's assume good faith on the part of our political class. Is the mess they've made of everything, particularly these last 2 years, are they capable of fixing it?
I mean, I don't know. I think as well, because of their fixation on blaming all the outside forces, which of course are, you know, are somewhat to blame, but not totally. You know, they're still going ahead with this net zero thing. despite energy prices skyrocketing, despite the fact you can't fill your car. Okay, they're still going ahead with HS2. They've still delayed the tax cut, which they could bring forward. So again, I unfortunately, Boris Johnson is not known for his discipline. He's not known for his eye, his eye on detail, which is what you need right now. And he's certainly not one to stand up for the mob or to the mainstream media, which is what he should have done all along with this ridiculous lockdown, and said, I'm sorry, but we're going to go Sweden's way because people didn't vote me in to literally destroy the economy, which will then seriously impact people's standards of living. He's not one he doesn't have any courage in relation to those. So unfortunately, I don't think he'll be able to make any really big decisions that will try and mitigate some of the, Armageddon apocalypse, whichever you want to word you want to use coming our way. I mean, you think he's already shoveled about 300 million towards the Ukraine anyway. Not sure he has a mandate for that. But the media will like him for 5 minutes, so why not?
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right about that. And all that footage of him standing between those knighted nitwits, claiming to be the public health technocrat experts. I never want to hear a word about anyone from rule by technocrats again. There's a reason why democratic government arose, and it wasn't because these self-proclaimed, over-credentialed experts were better at running everything. Thank you very much, Laura. It's always good to see you. Do read Laura's piece over at The Conservative Woman. You may have to make a little more effort in your clicking, because all these people like O2 and the British Board of Film Commissars are always trying to censor The Conservative Woman and restrict access to it, but you can just about get through to it. Thank you very much, Laura. As you'll know if you watch this show, almost every government on the planet has now signed on to the World Health Organization's new pandemic treaty, which transfers vast powers over public health to a transnational body that is basically China's court eunuch. There's been no parliamentary debate about this treaty, and that's the way they like it. Indeed, Billy Keller, the Irish MEP, God bless him, is already complaining that his impertinent whippersnapper constituents keep pestering him on the topic. Quote, very concerned about the latest campaign from the anti-vax movement to oppose the WHO pandemic treaty. The text hasn't been completed yet, and I'm already receiving dozens of emails per day. Oh, poor Billy, poor Billy. If only the EU could figure out a way to make these tedious citizens entirely irrelevant. As for politicians who actually matter, there has as yet been no questioning of any Prime Minister until today, that is. Here's Scott Morrison down under.
Would you consider signing up to that and handing over any controls to the organisation?
I have always been supportive right from the outset and was criticised heavily, I stress, heavily, mocked in fact by the Labor Party for saying the WHO should have those powers and those authorities to be able to go and deal with pandemic situations, because we all know what happened at the start of this pandemic.
Actually, no, we don't, Prime Minister. We don't know what happened at the start of this pandemic because China lied to the world, and China's poodle, Dr. Tedros at the WHO, recycled those Chinese lies and gave them the authority of the world's public health agency. So you're a nitwit, and you're entirely unfit to be the Queen's Australian Prime Minister, were it not for the fact that the only other bloke in the running for the job is even more nitwitted on the matter. Michelle Bachmann joins us from the United States, where she is Dean of the Robertson School of Government at Regent University. 10 years ago, she was my favourite presidential candidate in the 2012 US election. She represented Minnesota in Congress. Michelle, it's always good to see you. You're one of the few people who has been one of the few American political figures who's actually been speaking out about this.
Well, that's true. Most people don't know about it, and that's been by design. It was January 18th, as a matter of fact, when President Joe Biden sent amendments to the World Health Assembly that will be meeting in Geneva, Switzerland, May 22nd to 28th. The bottom line of what the amendments purport to do is to take all of the authoritarianism that has been decisions that have been made in various countries regarding the pandemic for 2.5 years. Now Joe Biden is offering amendments at the World Health Assembly, an arm of the United Nations, it's effectively the health organization, that will transfer individual national authority over emergency healthcare decisions away from the countries and to the general director of the WHO, who you said correctly is Tedros. He has been in charge of the WHO. He is the spokesperson for the Chinese Communist Party. Himself, he is a very controversial Marxist, and he got into a lot of trouble for covering up pandemics in his own home country of Ethiopia. So, of course, he was the perfect candidate for the Chinese to put in charge of the WHO. He now was just reelected for another 5 years. So here's the point that the GB News listeners need to understand. All of the authoritarianism that we saw all across the world, that we saw in China, that we saw in Great Britain, that we saw in the United States, that we saw down under with the Aussies and in New Zealand, all of that authoritarianism, if you thought that was bad, now it transfers to the UN body of the WHO. And if you read these amendments, and I encourage everyone to do that, I've read these amendments multiple times. It actually does transfer this level of authority. If you read it, you see that power is given unilaterally to Tedros. He doesn't have to have any scientific basis, no reasoning. He can make whatever decision he wants, even if it goes against what our country wants. He can go ahead and make those decisions. And if the political leadership in the country goes along with Tedros, it's done. And he can lock us up in our homes. He can mandate that we inject something in our body. He can force us to wear filthy masks. All of this absolute authoritarianism that is lawless, that is unconstitutional in the United States, would transfer over to the UN. It's absolutely shocking. And the vote is coming up next week, May 22nd through 28th. In Geneva, Switzerland, and this includes Great Britain has already signed on. There are about 47 nations, and it's real nations. It's not small little nations. It's the 47 large nations are on board. Why? I mean, this is insane to us. The reason why they're on board is because they actually do believe in a globalist agenda. They like the idea of a one world government. That used to be tinfoil hat stuff. Now, this is mainstream. The Bill Gates of the world, the Klaus Schwabs of the world, they all think this is great, and they have plans to put it into effect, and they're voting on it next week.
The plan seems to be that the tiny number of holdouts these last couple of years. So, for example, in your country, it was Florida. In Europe, it was Sweden. That in the future, there shouldn't be a Sweden or a Florida. That Dr. Tedros will actually have the power to decide for supposed sovereign nations what actually their public health emergency posture should be. Incredible that America would go along with it and that the UK would go along with it.
It is incredible, but it's not incredible if you look at the visual of the last 2 years. Imagine, I've read and kept up with what happened in the UK, the lockdowns and how the wanker cops went out and grabbed innocent mothers trying to take their children to the park for a walk. Look here in the United States what's happened. Congress didn't vote on anything. They didn't vote on mask mandates. They didn't vote on vaccine mandates. They didn't vote on lockdowns. They didn't vote on the rent moratorium. That was just a recommendation from our Centers for Disease Control that isn't even a regulatory body, that has no power of enforcement. It was really just a press release and a press conference. And that deprived landlords of rent for months and years at a time. So this is an actual economic attack. We're at war. We're at war. This is an attack on the economy of the global nations. And if you want one world government, I mean, that's what this is. This creates a platform for the WHO to have world government in every country that signs up. There's 194 participating nations. This isn't a treaty. This is a 2005 International Health Rules of the World Health Assembly. So it's not a treaty, so it doesn't require 2/3 vote in the Senate. It's an agreement that we entered into, and it only requires a majority vote.
You're quite right to point out that we have seen the total death of parliamentary, legislative authority and self-government, and that idiots like Dr. Fauci, we know he doesn't know anything about respiratory diseases, but it turns out he's an expert in regulating the rental property market in the United States. And so now that's been such a great success. We're going to give this Ethiopian political fixer the power to regulate the rental property market in the United States. These are plot twists that nobody could have. Thank you, Michelle, for being one of the few Americans to speak up about this in public life, and we hope there will be many more. That's Michelle Bachmann, ladies and gentlemen. Always great to see you. Michelle, I think Michelle's been practicing a Britannic vernacular because she used some robust language there. But you know, these are serious times. People deserve to have robust language about them. We're going to be coming up with Stump the Steyn, plus the vaccine data that no one seems to want to talk about. All coming up.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Here are the latest government numbers from the so-called yellow card system, covering the period up to May the 4th. So as of about a fortnight back, this is an official table from HMG. ADR is the official acronym for adverse reactions to the COVID vaccine. Take a look at this. Now, as you can see, if you add up the Pfizer, the AstraZeneca, the Moderna, and the Brand X, it comes to about 500,000 adverse reactions to the vaccine that have been reported. The government itself says that as a general rule, self-reporting only captures, this is the government's position, not mine, self-reporting only captures 10% of the cases. So on that basis, there could be as many as 5 million adverse effects from the vaccine. Be that as it may, even on the present numbers, we have an adverse event rate of 1 in 157 people for the Pfizer vaccine, 1 in 102 for the AstraZeneca, and 1 in 45 for the Moderna vaccine, which would be enough to get these things cancelled in normal circumstances, particularly given their pathetic lack of efficacy with every dose. And particularly given the way that fellas like Sajid Javid are still touting them as if we hadn't learned anything about their lack of efficacy in the last few months. James Freeman is a former MEP, a former statistician with the ONS, and he's backing Christopher Chope's campaign for justice for those injured and killed by the vaccines. And he's got a documentary that he's been making about the victims, which we're going to have some scenes from that documentary running under us. James, let me just ask you this. The film, by the way, is called A Letter to My MP. James, this is very odd, isn't it, that the public representation of these vaccines is not at all what these statistics seem to suggest. In other words, the propaganda doesn't seem to have caught up with the facts.
Yeah, I think, good evening, by the way, Mark, and thanks for having me on the show. I think it's quite shocking, really, isn't it? We've got 450,000 cases on the yellow card reporting system, reporting 1.5 million adverse reactions. And, you know, if you quote those numbers publicly, the government will say to you that that's misinformation. I mean, Sir Christopher Chope has actually been fact-checked by Full Fact on this. But when you ask the government what they're doing to actually clarify and actually look at the extent of the problem, it's a big fat zero. They're not doing anything. So I think, you know, there's a lot that the government need to be doing, because you've got to remember that our leaders told people that they had to have the vaccine. They coerced them, and in some cases they mandated them in the care industry.
Well, and they're still coercing them. And the thing about all that, those are the numbers. But the anecdotal stuff is tragic. I'm just seeing something from the Redditch Standard. This is Redditch in Worcestershire. 26-year-old man, dead, developed blood clots on the brain after getting the AstraZeneca. And as I said, this is some poor 26-year-old guy in Worcestershire. And it's reported in the local paper, and then nobody follows up on it. Nobody connects the dead guy in Redditch with the dead guy in Nottingham, with the dead lady in Carrickfergus, with the, you know, in other words, the trend goes unreported, except in things like your documentary.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you look at the actual vaccine damages debate that happened in March, which Sir Christopher Chope led, 6 MPs turned up to that debate. I've got one of the, so Claire in the documentary, she was actually diagnosed with VIT, so vaccine-induced thrombosis. She wrote to a Secretary of State, as her MP, she wrote to that MP 54 times over the course of a year, and she didn't get one response.
That's amazing. Is it because that if they were to respond, they'd be actually opening up the floodgates to the fact that all over the developed world we have increased mortality among the young and the middle-aged, and there has to be a reason for that, and yet we're not allowed even to talk about it?
Well, it is ridiculous, isn't it? Because, like I said, I'll just remind people that these are the same leaders which told us we had to have the vaccine. These people did what they were told, and they did it to protect others, so that, you know, they did the right thing according to what the politicians were telling us. They've been injured, they need help now, and they're being ignored. And, you know, the politicians told us we're all in this together, but we're not. You know, that's just words from them, and I want to see more action. It's not good enough.
Well, you're absolutely right about that. I don't see how, because the government asked us to do something extraordinary. It basically asked us to take this 26-year-old guy in Redditch. He had no need for his own health outcomes to take this thing. And that would be true if he were 36. And it would be true if he were 46. And we might actually start talking about it when he's 56 or 66. But basically, he's 30 years younger than a guy who ever needed to take this thing.
Well, Mark, look, what I'd say to the viewers here is watch the documentary. It's out on brand YouTube on Thursday. It premieres at 7 o'clock in the evening. watch it because it tells the stories of 4 members of UKCV family. They're a UK support group for vaccine-injured people. Watch it and make your own mind up. It's not about the vaccine. This is not anti-vax. These are people that have taken the vaccine. So watch it and make your own mind up, because I think people will be shocked, quite frankly.
Yeah. Do you think it will actually get some momentum going behind Christopher Chope's campaign?
I hope so, because I think what Chris is asking for is, it's not revolutionary. He's asking for 2 things. Firstly, we need an independent inquiry to assess the extent, because that's what the yellow card reporting system clearly is not fit for purpose. It doesn't do that. And then secondly, to actually develop the payment system, which is not fit for purpose, even though we've got coroner's reports actually associating the vaccine with deaths. There's lots of them. Not one payment has been made in the UK, which I find quite frankly disgusting.
OK, well, that will be very interesting to see. So we'll watch the documentary and then we'll have you back, James, to talk about some of the questions that it raises. But Christopher Chope is the loneliest man in the House of Commons at the moment, and he does need more support. In our closing moments, let's have a quick stump. What do we have? How long will it be before Putin arranges Novichok in Boris's tea? I could tell you the answer to that, Chris, but then you'd think I was working for the Russians. Alan says, I'd like to ask Mark why, even though I've had the typhoid, tetanus, polio, yellow fever, hepatitis and TB vaccines, I've never caught these diseases, not even once. Is there something wrong with these vaccines? Oh, you know, the tetanus, the polio, the yellow, they're the old kind of vaccine. We've changed the meaning of We've changed the meaning of all kinds of words, like man and woman. And now we've changed the meaning of the word vaccine too. Darryl says, will the economic migrants coming over the channel from war-torn France top the 100,000 mark in 2022? Could be worse, you know, Darryl. Thanks to Joe Biden, there's 6 million people expected to just walk into America between now and September. Basically, these guys don't seem to like the citizens they're actually elected to govern. OK, I have 2 words for you. They are the greatest 2 words in the late night television language. Dan Wootton, he's here right now.
Mark Steyn, you are far too kind. By the way, I'm so glad you played that clip of the Australian Prime Minister, Scott Morrison. I saw it earlier this week. And I was actually rooting for ScoMo until I saw that video about the World Health Organization and just thought, mate, you have blown it. But big show ahead, Mark. No one on the mainstream media is talking about Nicola Sturgeon's trip to the US. I say it's because it's been utterly catastrophic for her chances of delivering Scottish independence. I've got a special digest on this, Mark, coming up at 9.
OK, we'll look for that. And you also have Nigel, and you have the late night telly's all-time greatest panel. That's all coming up with Dan right after the weather. Stay safe, stay free.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. The weather's on a bit of a repeat cycle at the moment. Plenty of fine, bright, sunny weather by day. Thunderstorms around in the evening and at night. Here's the culprit. Big area of low pressure, but way out west and throwing weather fronts our way, but also drawing up warm and humid air from the south, hence the risk of thunderstorms. Some big downpours around at the moment, and so we'll see more of those heavy downpours across northern England and Scotland through the evening. The potential for a bit of lightning and thunderstorms across East Anglia and the southeast, but they all tend to clear away, so most places dry for much of the night, turning drier across Northern Ireland through the evening. Temperatures dropping down to 9, 10, 11 degrees Celsius generally, and for most it's going to be a fine day tomorrow. Yes, there'll be some showers, certainly through the morning across the Highlands, the Northern Isles and the Western Isles, but even here they should tend to drift away. And for most it's dry and bright, hazy sunshine for most